Hi everybody. So this video, I'll be talking about specific teams and like kind of how they play and what they do, and some variations from the standard stuff. Um, I'll say that I got links for all these like things that I'm describing just so people could watch the games, but they don't work anymore. It's because they were on the Gaming Stadium and the Gaming Stadium 2 Twitch channels, and these VODs are either deleted or behind a paywall, so I can't access them anymore. But they all take you to a timestamp of the exact game where you see some of what they're doing. Um, and if somebody does have a subscription, they could check them out. I'm just leaving the links in there, like, just in case they do work in some way. But in general, like, you're not going to find anything anymore with them, and you'll just have to trust me when I was watching them. But basically, these links are all Cal Cup games. Um, they're a mix of the Fall Minor, the Fall Major, and the Championship too, I believe. Um, yeah, the Championship too. Okay, so so first I'll just say, like, we'll start with CA Gold. These have been, they've been overall the best team over the last few months. Of course, they disbanded now, but when they were together, they were overall the best team. Uh, Randalorians were very close. I'd say they were pretty equally matched, but CA Gold overall was like sort of the top tier, team that everyone tried to emulate. And they were very objective focused, because that just kind of how the game went. And so I'll sort of repeat some of the things from if you listen to the class on, like, sort of the general strategies of what teams do. But on New Republic, they'll run the two flexes, the X-Wings with ion missile proton torpedo. And I'll just mention the proton torpedo is very good. It's useful at all phases in the game. On defense, two X-Wings, a few lasers, and each shooting an ion missile. The Raider's shields will get stripped. You launch your proton torpedoes. It does almost a third of the damage of the hull to it. So if each one launches one, you're over halfway, and then your laser fire will finish it off. So you could kill a Raider really quickly on defense with those two flexes. And of course on offense, your proton torpedoes, you just use them to take out the hull. They take 10% off a cruiser, and I believe 5% on the flagship. And you'll just ask for resupplies to keep those torps going. You'll also have two farmers. I talked about the loadouts already, and one support. And on Empire, they're going to have two flexes. They almost always run two TIE defenders. And of course, the ion missile with the second auxiliary of the anti-starfighter missile and the APS. And of course, on Empire, they'll also have two farm bombers and a support. Now, I've seen a trend in the game to be more PK heavy on the flexes. So Knight actually has been running primary lasers on the X-Wing. He's one of the few that do. And he's always run primary on the defender, but I'm seeing both defenders run it now, where before it used to be like one would run burst. And I think the main reason for that is the game comes down so much to winning the opening, and if you can just get a kill on a bomber, it like makes it very likely you'll win the opening. So maximizing your chance at getting a kill is worth it, because the loss in capship damage from switching from burst to primary isn't huge if you win the opening, like, because you're going to win the game in 2 or 3 phases. So losing a small amount of damage is okay. But if you win the opening, you're kind of guaranteeing that, or almost guaranteeing that you're going to win. And this is basically how they play most of their games. I'll talk about a couple exceptions, though. So if they play against a team that's heavy on ICT Y-Wings, and this is something Randalorians used to do, they'll actually go to TIE fighters instead of defenders. One of the TIE fighters would run repair and ion missiles, and the other one would run proton torpedo and ion missile. Now, the reason, of course, to run TIE fighters is they care a lot less about ICTs. They don't have shields. They take, if they're not beacon, they take 6 shots to get disabled. So they're pretty tanky against getting, disabled by a Y-wing. In terms of the loadout, proton torpedo is very good on a TIE fighter, just like it was good on an X-wing. The reason I think one of them runs repair is because you don't want to overtax the support, because it's very important for the support to be able to resupply the TIE bombers, because that's actually a big part of why they're survivable. Because you don't have shields on the TIE bomber, you will take some laser damage over time, and so repair is important to keep you alive and keep you in the fight. So I think the reason to have one TIE fighter run repair is so the support's kind of only worried about resupplying 3 ships. That TIE fighter with repair would only get resupplied in an emergency or if they need ion missiles. And then the other thing, which is sort of meta, was to run 3 TIE bombers actually, and 1 defender. So Knight would be running the TIE defender. He'd be running, anti-starfighter missile and ion missile. And I think the main idea with this is to make it very likely you'll win the opening, and then to really press the objective damage on offense. Now, the maps that I've seen this on most are Yavin and Galatan. And I'm not 100% if they did this because it was map specific, or maybe it's just about availability of players and they figured, 3 bombers works fine. So if we have 3 bombers available, we'll just have them fly those and only have 1 flex. And this was only on Empire, by the way. This was an Empire specific build. But so the idea with this is on the opening, each TIE bomber will hit a 5-pack because you have 3 packs start. You always have 3 separate packs or 15 AI out at a time. So each TIE bomber would go for a pack, and you basically can get 15 AI pretty quickly. And then the TIE defender, will go and try to get a kill on the Y-wing. One of the TIE bombers usually will switch to the Raider / helping PK. And on defense, 2 of the TIE bombers will farm because that's enough to saturate, except on the hardest of farm maps. But 2 TIE bombers will farm. A third one would be overkill and would overlap with the existing 2. So 1 TIE bomber sort of plays like a flex bomber. They'll focus the Raider. They'll do help on PK. And that's how they'll play their defense. But I think the key thing with this is the opening. It's not too hard for them to win the opening when they can get a farm advantage. Knight himself is maybe the best PK in the game, so he can kill people by himself in a TIE defender. The TIE defender versus Y-wing matchup's favorable for Empire, so they're good on player kills in that way. And then on offense, even though they only have 1 ion missile for stripping, it doesn't matter because the TIE bomber's rotary is just going to do fine. So the bombers will, strip the shields down. In terms of a flagship offense, I'll write this down here. So flagship offense, favor resupply over beacons. Bombers can take down subsystems. So the basic thing here is what'll happen in the game is, let's say the support doesn't have a resupply available, but they have beacons and they're about to go on the flagship attack. The support will actually not go for the beacons and go for the resupply instead. So they'll resupply themselves before going on the flagship. And the reason is it's very important for the bombers to get resupplies. And 3 TIE bombers just do so much damage that not having beacons isn't a big deal. Because you can still have 2 TIE bombers together knock out 1 shield gen, 1 TIE bomber, and the defender help knock out the other. And they can just rotary everything down. You don't need to disable, you don't need to destroy power with ions, just rotaries. Destroy everything with the rotaries. It just does so much damage. And so the support is mainly concerned with just keeping those TIE bombers alive, and they can get beacons in later. And that's just the main ways I've seen CA Gold play. They just play the standard loadout build against ICT Y-Wings. They'll go TIE fighters instead of defenders. And then on some cases, they'll run 3 TIE bombers with Empire. And that's pretty strong from what I've seen. Okay, so let's go to the Randalorians. So they got second in the Cal Cup Championship. They were very close to beating CA Gold. I think these two teams are like very closely matched, and these two teams are a cut above everyone else. Now, I'm going to start talking about less meta stuff, or less of the 2-2-1 style. But I would say that like all the teams that I'm going to talk about do the standard style most of the time. But I want to talk about sort of the different things they do, just so people kind of are aware of like, you don't have to play super meta. You could still be, one of the best teams in the game doing weirder stuff. So, play to have fun, especially if it's like you're just doing public queues. Like if you're in a public queue with me in the squadrons lobby, you can, fly an A-wing and PK with it. I'm not going to care. It's only in like something like in competitive practice or competitive matches where I'd expect, people to play certain ways. But something the Randalorians now kind of figured out is how to go 3 ICT Y-Wings in a fleet battle. So they would go 3 ICT Y-Wings of support and 1 flex. And the Y-Wings, one would always have a Goliath, one would always have a multi-lock. And usually the third will have multi-lock or Goliath. I think I've seen Proton Torpedo too, but I can't check back in videos anymore, so I may be wrong about that. But what I do definitely remember is the Flex would run Ion Torpedo and Proton Torpedo. I said regular lasers. Burst should be fine too. I think that was a player preference and not like a major thing. So the way they would play this is like, I guess to note is the ICT is doing all the disabling because they have 3 of them on the field. And of course, against the top players, it's hard to get kills without a disable. And the Flex doesn't even run an ion missile. And I think the reason for this is, I mentioned before on the 2-2-1 style, the X-Wings with the proton torpedoes end up being the big capture damage dealers. But since you only have 1 X-Wing, you don't want to give up too much capture damage, so you want to keep the proton torpedo. And unlike Empire, Y-Wings can't do the damage that TIE bombers can, because they can't just shunt, they can't shunt. Their rotaries won't be able to keep up much energy, and that's why usually people will use standard. It's also because of their flight patterns, they can't hold drifts very long, so rotary kind of like slows you down. Whereas primary lasers, you can stay more evasive as you shoot them with the boost gasping that you need to do on a Y-Wing. But so the X-Wing, though, will run ion torpedo, and that's what they use to strip shields. And it's very key that this Flex is very good at this and is very aggressive with getting the shield stripped. Because it's important that they quickly get the ion torpedo out and that a support resupplies them so that they can use it again when they need to. Because they'll use the ion torpedo to strip the Raider on defense, and of course they'll use it to strip the cruisers on offense. And so a counter that teams will try to do is to if they could, outright kill the Flex, but they could shoot down the ion torpedo, and it's vulnerable to getting shot down just because it's slow. So it's even more key than normal for this Flex to be very fast. So they're very aggressive about getting into position properly on both offense and defense and getting the shield stripped. Because teams do look to either chaff or, shoot down the torpedo in some way. In terms of Empire, they also do a 3 TIE Bomber loadout. Play it similar to CA Gold, where you try to win that opening farm with the three AI packs and just the heavy TIE Bomber damage. In their case, they actually prefer the TIE Fighter. I think that's just a stylistic thing, and it's more of like this is more objective focus rather than PK focus, because Knight's running the Defender with anti-starfighter missile. This TIE Fighter is running Ion Torpedo and Proton Torpedo. So they're kind of playing it like the X-Wing, getting that extra damage with the Proton Torpedo and the Ion Torpedo for the stripping. And of course the 1 support. Now, one thing I'll say about this is I think it is a weak point to have only that 1 flex with the Ion Torpedo stripping, because it can get stopped, and if it does, you're kind of in a bad spot. You'll have to get a resupply and launch another torp. And I think they mostly stopped doing this because they found that they just needed to play sort of the CA Gold style to match with CA Gold. But what I'll say is that it might be valuable to mix in this type of style, because most teams do field 2 defenders on Empire, and the 3 ICT Y-Wings are just really strong against defenders. It really zones them out, including the support too, actually. Like shielded ships will just have a hard time doing anything with that much ICT out. In terms of the Empire side, I think it is better to go with the TIE Defender, just because if you're going to win in 2 attack phases, it doesn't matter if you win it like 15 seconds faster. It just matters that you won in 2 phases. So I think like having the extra objective damage isn't super useful when you have the 3 TIE Bombers. I think the Defender with stronger PK is preferable. Or at least a TIE Fighter, with an ion missile for PK. Just because, like, how many phases you need to win is like map dependent, but it's going to be 2 or 3. If it takes more than that, like something's going wrong in the game, like too many player deaths or something. But at highest level, it's 2 or 3 attack phases. And if you can't increase your damage to reduce an entire phase, your damage isn't like super useful. It would only be useful in like really narrow circumstances where you're both in a base race and it comes down to like 5 hull difference and who wins. But the fact is, like, games are usually won by the opening, not in a base race that's almost even. And I think having that PK flex on the Empire is better to help you win the opening. Okay, so let's move to the next team, and that's Imperial Guard. So a very famous player on their team, or famous in squadrons, obviously. We're a small community, nobody outside the game knows this. But Narcissus is a very famous support in our community, and it's because he would use Tractor Beam. Now, this is something they did a lot and switched off of it, just because resupplies are strong. But they would basically fly the standard loadout, but the support would run Tractor Beam instead of resupply, and they were more PK heavy, including on offense. And they did this on both factions. And like the key thing with it is just the Tractor Beam helps you kill players, and so you just get more kills. You'll resupply at your frigates, and then on the flagship defense or whatever, you could just resupply going into the hangar. Now, I think the weakness of this, though, is your objective damage is slowed down when you can't resupply proton torpedoes. Your TIE bombers are a lot easier to kill without resupplies. And so they did end up switching to basically using resupplies most of the game. They do Tractor Beam on flagship defense, and I know Hug Cartel did that too, and I think Hug Cartel might have been the first to actually use Tractor Beam, but I think Narcissus really showed like the power of it, because Narcissus is one of the best supports in the game. He's just very talented. So what he would do with the tractor beam was very strong. I think another reason they might have moved on is, well, one is like losing to CA Gold. Like they would, like I mentioned, Randalorians and CA Gold were like a cut above other teams. So they would just like 3-0 Imperial Guard. And the Imperial Guard was like either the third or fourth best team in a tournament. So just being like badly beaten by this team, it's hard to just not do what they're doing because they're beating you so easily. But then the last thing is players, I think, got better at dealing with tractor beam. If you do get tractor beam, what you want to do is, zero throttle and boost and drift, and you'll start to get out of it. So tractor beam has kind of become, more of a flagship defense thing. And on flagship defense, it does help. Even if players can get out of a tractor beam, it does still slow them down, so it'll make killing easier. And, once you're on defense on the flagship, you usually don't need resupplies at that point, because you dished them out on your way to switch the support. Or players can just go to the hangar themselves because they're nearby anyway. Okay, so the next team is Baywatch. So Baywatch is like a sister team to the Randalorians one. They're part of Randalorians. And one thing that they would regularly use is the ion torpedo. I've seen them use it on NR and Empire. And so basically, and I think this is actually, I'm saying on NR they had one with repair. I think this probably changed to proton torpedo. I'll leave this as it is right now. Because when I wrote all these down, I watched the videos and took, looked at the screen. But basically, they're using the ion torpedo to strip shields quickly. Oh, actually, this is a mistake. This isn't tractor beam. One support. Yeah, they didn't run tractor beam. That was copied over from the Imperial Guard bullet point. I'm wondering if this may have been a mistake too then. I'll just write this down. Okay, so now proton torpedo is probably used. But the idea with the ion torpedo is just to strip the shields quickly. And then you could strip shields on both the cruisers faster that way. But like I said before in another video, without ion torpedo, you can strip shields in like less than 10 seconds in an ideal case. And in general, it should be under 20 seconds. So ion torpedo isn't super needed, and most teams have moved away from it. One interesting thing, though, is they seem to favor it more on the Empire. I think they've even switched off of ion torpedo on New Republic altogether. Because I remember seeing them not use it in games recently. But on Empire, they do still use it, I've seen. And they'll fly one TIE fighter with ion torpedo. And I think the idea is, they just want to strip shields quickly, especially if they have an interceptor. So sometimes they'd run one interceptor, and this used to be more common, like sort of before CA Gold became the top team. So around the time when Splinter was the top team, and they were, playing their hardest. This was like when they won like the Twin Suns tournament. Splinter was the top team, and Scalpwalker would use an interceptor, and this interceptor was very heavy on PK. And so it would use the standard laser, repair, and targeting jammer. And it would basically fend for itself. It didn't need a resupply from the support. It has no auxiliaries that are, require ammo. Everything's on cooldown. So the interceptor would be heavy on PK, including on offense. And, they do capship damage when it was appropriate. But teams have moved away from the interceptor. I see it sometimes, but it's just not common. I'll say that Baywatch, I think, still uses the ion torp on the TIE fighter. It's usually, though, instead of an interceptor, they'll fly a defender. So, I'll just write this more recently. Interceptor is less used. And sometimes I don't know if they use it because they think it's actually good. I think sometimes it's just like players like Sitka really like flying it, so they'll just fly it for fun, because there's nothing actually on the line in these games, especially now. Like there's literally no money, so people want to have fun when they're playing. um, yeah, and I'm mentioning down here they'll do more standard lineups. Okay, so I'll get to the Hut Cartel now. They were doing something interesting, and this was in the Cal Cup Fall Minor. They got to the finals, losing to Imperial Guard, and they actually would not fly 2 farm bombers. They'd only use 1. And they did this by flying 3 flexes instead. What they did was they had 1 flex who was more capship damage oriented, and on New Republic this was the Proton Torp concussion missile. On Empire this was a defender with concussion missile and cluster. And then 2 flexes were more PK heavy. And so what they would do is, they would just rely on 1 farmer, and then they would use the 3 flexes for heavy PK, and then also to, of course, to do the capture damage on offense. One thing I noticed about this in their games is it was more often that they would lose the opening, and that's just bad at high level. On Empire, they would kind of get away with it, because especially at that time, Empire was just winning a lot more. It's still the case. Empire seems to be favored overall. But on New Republic, they struggled a lot more, because a lot of New Republic games, you kind of have to win the opening and add a phase of Star Destroyer. And so they would lose the opening on New Republic and struggle from there. And basically, they lose the opening because they can't keep up on farm. And if their farmer gets picked or disrupted, they're in a really tough spot. But if they did get the kills, it was really strong. Specifically on Empire with 3 defenders, defenders can be really hard to kill. Without ICT, I'd say it's the hardest ship to kill. You could argue a TIE fighter with repair, but they're both. But the defender's up there. It's really hard to take out without ICT. So they would just have lots of damage happening that it was hard for you to repel. They would also PK on offense with their flexes, so they would go after farmers to prolong their offense. But overall, they would play more standard. And one thing I would note is on Empire, the 3 defender, that would not fare well against the Randalorians when they're running the 3 ICT. So I've seen them run games where, they don't run that 3 TIE defender loadout just because it'll struggle in some situations. But overall, as we got towards like the Cal Cup Championship, the Fall Major and the Cal Cup Championship, they were doing this less. But they got to the finals of the Cal Cup Fall Minor, so even with 1 farmer, you can still be one of the strongest teams in the game. That's going to be the last team I'm talking about today. Of course, there are other very good teams, like I didn't say anything about Tempest. There's been some recent B-Wing play, especially from Nova. I'm not actually sure how good it is, because with Randalorians, CA Gold, and Imperial Guard disbanding their 5-stack teams, the competition level has dropped, and I think players are taking the game less seriously too. So like, I didn't want to go into how to use the B-Wing because I'm not sure how good it actually is, and most people aren't flying it anyway. But I kind of wanted to highlight the differences for NRN players, because a lot of times you're in a public queue and you don't have like a normal 5-stack doing normal things. But you know what? You don't have to do the normal things. You can actually play really well without it. And this is just gives some other things if people want to play around with for fun. that's going to be the end of this video. Thanks for listening to it. Um, I have another one that I'm going to do on some more tactical information on fleet battles. Thanks for watching.